The day I found the letter, the house felt different. Not empty, not exactly quiet, just still. My mother had been gone for 3 days. The funeral was over, the relatives had gone home. Even the neighbors who had been bringing food every afternoon had stopped coming by. For the first time since she passed away, the house was just mine, and the silence felt heavy. I stood in the living room looking around at the same furniture that had been there my whole life. The same sofa, the same old coffee table, the same pale curtains my mother refused to replace, even though they had faded from the sun. Everything looked familiar, but it didn't feel the same. When someone lives in a house for 40 years, their presence stays in small places, in the smell of the kitchen, in the creaking of the stairs, in the quiet rhythm of everyday life. Without my mother there, the house felt like it was holding its breath. I told myself I should start cleaning, sorting through things. That's what people do after someone passes away. They organize, they pack away memories, they decide what to keep and what to let go. But every time I opened a drawer or touched something that belonged to her, I stopped. It felt too soon, too final. So instead, I walked slowly through the house, room by room, almost like I was saying goodbye. The kitchen was the first place I stopped. The window above the sink was open slightly, just the way my mother always kept it, even in cold weather. She used to say fresh air made a house feel alive. A small dish towel still hung neatly over the oven handle. The kettle sat on the stove. For a moment, I imagined hearing it whistle the way it used to every evening around 6. That was when my mother made tea, every single day. I stood there longer than I expected. Then I moved on. The hallway felt darker than usual. At the end of it was my mother's bedroom. I hadn't gone inside since the day she was taken to the hospital. I hesitated before opening the door, but eventually I did. The room smelled faintly like her perfume. Soft, familiar. Her bed was neatly made, just as she had left it. On the bedside table sat her glasses and the book she had been reading. I picked it up. A thin bookmark rested between the pages. She had stopped in the middle of a chapter. I wondered if she had planned to finish it later that night, or if she had simply fallen asleep. I placed the book back down gently. Then I opened the closet. Inside were rows of neatly folded clothes, sweaters, scarves, dresses she rarely wore anymore. My mother had always been an organized person. Every item had its place. But something caught my attention near the back of the closet. On the top shelf was a small wooden box. I had never seen it before. It was simple, dark wood, no lock, no decoration, just a small box sitting quietly behind a stack of old blankets. I reached up and pulled it down. Dust covered the lid, which meant it had been there for a long time. I carried it to the bed and sat down. For a moment, I just stared at it. Something about it made me nervous. Maybe it was the feeling that it had been hidden, or maybe it was the strange sense that whatever was inside had been waiting for someone to finally open it. Slowly, I lifted the lid. Inside the box was only one thing, a single envelope, old, yellowed with age. My name was written on the front, Daniel. The moment I saw the handwriting, my heart skipped, because I recognized it instantly. It was my father's handwriting. My father had died 20 years ago. I picked up the envelope carefully. My hands had started shaking without me realizing it. Why would my father write me a letter? And why had it been hidden inside this box for 20 years? My mother had kept it, but she had never given it to me. Not once. I turned the envelope over. It had already been opened, which meant someone had read it before. My chest tightened. Who had read it? My mother? My sister? Both of them? And why had they decided not to tell me? I sat there for a long time, just holding it. Part of me didn't want to open it again, because life has a strange way of changing the moment you learn something you were never meant to know. But my name was written on the front. That meant the letter was meant for me. Eventually, I slid the paper out. It was folded carefully, almost neatly, like someone had taken their time writing it. I unfolded it slowly, and I began to read. Dear Daniel, if you are reading this letter, it means something happened before I could tell you the truth myself. My breathing stopped. The truth? What truth? I continued reading. There are things about our family that you do not know. I hoped someday I would have the courage to explain them to you in person. A strange feeling settled in my chest, something between curiosity and fear. My father had always been a calm, honest man. He fixed radios in his small repair shop downtown. Everyone in our town trusted him. I had never imagined he might be hiding something. But the next line changed everything. Long before you were born, I made a mistake that has followed me my entire life. I lowered the letter for a moment. My hands felt cold. What kind of mistake? I took a breath and kept reading. I had another life once, before I met your mother. My heart began beating faster. There was a woman I loved, and together we had a child. I stared at the page. A child. My father had another child, which meant I had a brother or a sister, someone I had never known existed, someone my family had kept secret for 20 years. The house around me felt even quieter now, like the walls themselves were listening. I kept reading, but one question echoed in my mind over and over again. Why had my mother hidden this letter, and why had no one ever told me the truth? For a long time, I sat on my mother's bed holding the letter. The room felt smaller now, like the walls had moved closer while I was reading. A brother. Somewhere in the world, there was a man who shared my father's blood. A man I had never met. A man I had never even heard about. I read the letter again, then again. Each time the words felt heavier. My father had written about regret, about choices he wished he could change. But the letter ended before explaining everything. At the bottom of the page was only a name, Michael Carter, and a small town in another state. No address, no phone number, just that. Almost like my father had hoped I would search for him someday. But the part that troubled me most was not the secret itself. It was the silence. 20 years. 20 years my mother had this letter, and she never told me, never even hinted at it. I folded the paper slowly and placed it back inside the envelope. My mind kept circling the same question. Did Clara know? My older sister had always been closer to my mother than I was. They talked about everything. At least that was what I believed growing up. Maybe she had known all along. Maybe they had both decided I should never find out. The thought made my chest feel tight. I looked around my mother's bedroom one more time. Everything seemed the same, but somehow nothing felt the same anymore. I stood up, placed the wooden box back in the closet, and walked out of the room. That night, I barely slept. The letter lay on the bedside table next to me. Every time I closed my eyes, my father's words echoed again in my mind. There are things about our family you do not know. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I had to talk to Clara. My sister lived 3 hours away. She had moved there almost 15 years earlier after getting married. Her life was very different from mine. Big house, busy neighborhood, 2 children always running around. Clara had always liked movement and noise. I had always preferred quiet. The drive there felt longer than usual. The entire time, the envelope sat on the passenger seat beside me. Sometimes I glanced at it like it might disappear, but it never did. When I finally arrived, Clara opened the door before I even knocked. She pulled me into a warm hug. "I'm glad you came," she said softly. Her house smelled like fresh coffee and laundry detergent, a familiar kind of comfort. We sat at the kitchen table. For a while, we talked about normal things. Her kids, the funeral, memories of our mother. Clara told a story about how Mom used to burn toast every Sunday morning. We both laughed quietly. But eventually, the moment came. I reached into my jacket and placed the envelope on the table. Clara froze. Her eyes dropped to the handwriting, and something in her face changed. "You found it," she said quietly. The words were not a question, they were an answer. My heart sank a little. You knew about it. Clara didn't speak right away. She just looked at the envelope. Then she nodded slowly. Yes. The kitchen felt suddenly very quiet. You knew for 20 years? I asked. Her voice was calm, but heavy. Mom told me after Dad died. I leaned back in my chair, trying to understand. So you both decided not to tell me. Clara looked up at me. It wasn't that simple. I didn't raise my voice, but my words came out sharper than I expected. It seems pretty simple. She sighed. Daniel, you were 14 when Dad died. I know how old I was. You were quiet back then, sensitive. Mom was afraid learning something like this would hurt you even more. I stared at the table. That was her decision to make? Clara's voice softened. She didn't want to lose you too. I frowned a bit. What does that mean? Clara folded her hands together. Dad gave Mom that letter a few weeks before the accident. I listened carefully. He told her to give it to you when you were older. Then why didn't she? She hesitated. Then she said something that surprised me. Because she was afraid you would go looking for him. For who? Your brother. The word still felt strange. Brother. Like a puzzle piece that had never been part of my life before. And? Clara took a slow breath. She thought if you found him, maybe you'd feel like part of you belonged somewhere else. I shook my head slightly. So she kept it from me. Clara nodded sadly. She kept it from both of us for a while. I didn't know about the letter until 2 years later. And you agreed with her? Clara looked out the kitchen window. At first, yes. The afternoon light touched her face gently. She looked older than I remembered. Why? I asked. Because Mom was alone, Daniel. After Dad died, you were the one who stayed with her. You helped her with everything. I didn't say anything. She continued quietly. She depended on you more than you realized. I thought back to those years. The grocery store where she worked, the way I fixed things around the house, the evenings we spent watching television together. Maybe Clara was right. Maybe Mom had been afraid. Afraid that if I discovered another family connection, I might leave too. The thought made my chest ache, not with anger, but with a strange sadness. She should have trusted me, I said softly. Clara nodded sadly. I think she wanted to tell you many times. Then why didn't she? Clara gave a small, tired smile. Because the longer you keep a secret, the harder it becomes to break it. Neither of us spoke for a while. The letter rested quietly between us. Finally, I asked the question that had been sitting in my mind all morning. Do you know anything about him? Clara shook her head. Only the name. Michael Carter. Yes. I looked down at the envelope again. For the first time in my life, my family felt larger and more complicated. Somewhere out there was a man who had grown up without my father. A man who might not even know that his father had spent years regretting the past. A man who had never known me. I wondered what his life had been like. Did he have children? Did he know about us? Or had he spent his whole life believing he was alone? Clara watched my face carefully. You're thinking about finding him. It wasn't a question. I nodded slowly. I think Dad wanted me to. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something gentle. If you do, just be prepared. For what? He might not want to meet you. The possibility had already crossed my mind, but hearing it out loud made it feel real. I know. Clara reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. No matter what happens, you're still my brother. I smiled faintly. That's good to know. We sat there a little longer, two siblings holding a secret that had been buried for 20 years. But something inside me had already begun to change. The moment I read my father's letter, a door had opened, and now I could not pretend it wasn't there. Before I left, Clara walked me to the door. Daniel, she said softly. Yes? If you find him, tell me. I will. Then I stepped outside. The afternoon sun felt warm on my face. I stood beside my car for a moment. The envelope was still in my hand. Inside it was a name, a place, and a story that had never been finished. I realized something then. If I ignored the letter, my father's regret would remain unfinished, and the silence would continue for another 20 years. But if I tried, maybe the story could finally find an ending. So I opened the car door, placed the envelope on the seat beside me, and started the engine. Somewhere ahead of me was a small town, and in that town lived a man named Michael Carter, the brother I had never known, and the truth my family had hidden for 20 years.
Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can bring more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you the next life story with love and respect.